Okay, thank you. Thank everybody for coming to the conference. It was expressed enough, so I don't need to get into that anymore. Just need to go straight into the transportation access portion of the conference. My name is Welsh, as Ariane expressed. I've worked in around the world in aviation, and I spent the last, let me see, 2015 through 19 in Montserrat, being the accountable manager for Fly Montserrat and the operations manager. And I saw different aspects of access while being there, and would like to talk about it at this stage of the game. So please go to the second slide. Conference objectives. What we intend to do is to convey what our intent is to the public in order to create a framework for discourse. Basically, we believe that with local Montserratians and the diaspora, we want to get their perspectives into our thought process, and just so that we're not doing this in a vacuum or among ourselves. We want the public involvement. And that's one of the reasons why this conference was put forth, to solicit the thoughts of the public. Our intent is to try to influence government policy, hopefully, if the government would be open to engage with us and vice versa. That's the expressed intent of the group. The third one is basically the public will help us. We have very noble intentions, and we have altruistic intentions. We believe we're doing the right thing, but we don't know. We can't assume anything. So this is one of the reasons why we're trying to engage with the public. And we want the debate, we want exchange, we want we want the best ideas to come to the top. We operate in a meritocracy, and we want the best ideas to come to the top. The best ideas might not come from us, it may come from the public. So even though I think I might have the answers, I can't assume that. So we want to get the public involvement, and that's the principal objective of this. Next, please. The access, I want to talk about the dimensions of access. The access cannot exist by itself in a private environment. It requires the help of the government in a matter of organization and financial support. Over the years, the policies were implemented for various governments. They have not been a continuous, the governments have not followed through on previous government's policies. There have been lots of changes over the years, and the transportation service needs a longer term plan. It needs government involvement, and it needs continuity from one government to the next. So we're hoping that this government will lay the groundwork for the future, for future governments. And when the future governments come in, if there are other governments, or whether this one continue, they would keep on going with the processes that are put in place from this point forward. The third bulletin here talks about the cost structure of the access. The economy is a scale of, because of the lack of population, underutilization of infrastructure and resources, personal resources. It could be looked at and viewed potentially by some people, or even by the UK government, which is where we get most of the capital for the access, as being a misallocation of capital. Because, for instance, I'll explain that a little bit further, but we do not have enough traffic. We do not have enough utilization of the resources. And so even when we only have 2 flights a day or 2 ferry runs a day, when the ferry was in service, the rest of the time, the assets sat there for the entire day. So we have the burden of carrying the entire cost structure of the airport, the facilities, the firemen, the immigration people, customs, the port, everything carries along, even though it's got very low usage. So there's a huge cost structure, and that chews up a lot of the capital we get in access. So we need better use of that. And that's one of the things we want to look into in this presentation and in our policy engagement with the government. The other idea is that consumer impression is, they believe the consumers, I've worked in the area, and the consumers, which is the traveling public, mostly do not believe the service is of good quality, both air and sea service. I don't have to speak too much about that, but everybody knows that they've had issues both with the aircraft and with the ferry service. So for those of you who travel back and forth to Montserrat, you understand the quality is mediocre at best. So we want to talk a little bit about how that could be improved, and that be part of the access plan. We can't forget the quality of service. Could you go to the next slide, please? Without government support, the affordability would be prohibitive. We wouldn't, it's barely affordable now. And without the support of the government, it would be prohibitive. In other words, if the average person wanted to go to Antigua, for instance, to go to the doctor and come back for one day, it'd be too much money without government help. So this is one of the reasons why although we believe in private enterprise and all that, access is one of the areas that we believe the government involvement will need to continue for some time. One of the issue, however, is that the government, through resources that's provided by the UK, spends a certain amount of money every year on access in a subsidy regime. And over the period of time, the plan for resolving long-term affordability access, we don't have anything in place. We still, after so many years, we do not have anything to show for it. We have a service, it's mediocre, but we don't have any assets really that belongs to the island in any particular way. So we believe that if access were part of a wider network, that we are allowed to scale it when we need to at certain times of year. For instance, low season, we wouldn't have so much assets sitting on the ground. High season, we'll have more. If we were part of a bigger network, maybe there'll be opportunities for cost savings, because we wouldn't have to carry the entire infrastructure continuously all year long, and we'll have better use of the assets that we have, better use of the resources. So that's something that the government has looked into this before. We have looked into this, and it's still Montserrat still operates autonomously from the rest of the islands, from the rest of the region. We have to carry our own resources, and because of that, it's very expensive. So if we want to have affordable access, we need to look at a wider region of being part of something instead of just being access just for Montserrat alone. Next slide. With regard to perspectives, the island has struggled over the last 25 years, particularly since post-volcano. The island has struggled for anything beyond basic living, residential living. That's all the island has right now. Not much else goes on there for the people who live there. When it comes to job development, personal development, we do not have a lot of resources beyond residential living. The connectivity to other islands are limited. You can see Nevis, for instance, you can't get there. It might take a whole day to get there. Or you can see Guadeloupe and the same thing will happen. So Montserrat is stuck in a time warp when it comes to outside access. Everything is basically through Antigua. And we believe that this is something that we should look at as, or the government should look at, or the purveyors of the access should look at also, to stretch beyond the framework of Antigua only. We need to develop access and not let it be just part of just transportation only. So the word access, people think of it as ferry and airplane only, but it really, really should go beyond just transport. So this is where a policy proposal to the government would be to look at access beyond transportation. What else could we put into access or be part of access so that the transport part of it becomes more useful and be able to stimulate other activities on island, commerce in particular, and be a larger part of the island's development. So not just transport, but transport and then what? Transport to do what? This is the framework that we want to talk about. Next slide, please. The cost benefit analysis have shown that if you think of the government has put, say, $5-6 million a year into access for the last 20, 25 years. If you multiply that, that's more than $100 million. So we've put more than $100 million potentially. I don't know the exact figures, but it's in that order, into access over the last 20 to 25 years. And what does the public has to really show for this? We still get basic service, but the island doesn't get anything beyond that. So it's a major resource or capital that we have that could be used different areas, and all we get from it is just a mediocre service, just transport. So we need a better way of leveraging the capital that we use for access to get more from it for the people of Montserrat, for the island itself. So that what we're hoping is that in the next 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, it does not replicate what we had before. So this is one of the things that we need to talk about. One of the things that we have to open up to is that to make sure that the near-term future, the intermediate future, and the longer-term future, we actually have something to show for the monies that get spent for access. The money is spent, we get some service, but there's no longer-term benefits to the island other than the service that went by, and we are $100 million deep, and we have nothing to show for it. So we believe access should comprise more than just transportation. There should be some initiatives with some more valuable contributions to the island. That's part of access. So the money gets spent not only in access, it becomes more beneficial for the island over time. The opportunity cost of $100 million, if you think of it, if you had $100 million today in Montserrat, what you can really do with it, and you tell people, oh, we use it to subsidize access, or we use it to bring people back and forth. That's not good enough. We think that you need to get more from it. When you're spending that kind of money for such a small population, there should be more benefit than just something that you expend or you use and then you have nothing else beyond that. Next. So here's where we believe the government needs to develop an approach that supports business development and value chains. And when I mean value chains, what else to support the business that are critical for transitioning from a more beneficial aspect of access. So in other words, when we have access, what else do we develop around it? We've struggled with tourism. We do not have a tourism section. If we're going to focus on access and we're going to focus on tourism, we need to bring the powers to be on tourism so we can get something out of it, for instance. So we do not have any training for people. We do not have any anything beneficial that comes out of access for tourism, for instance. And we depend on tourism. There's a lot of effort that goes into tourism, but it's very mediocre over years and over years and over years. Nothing else comes out. The funding agencies, which is principally the UK government, or there might be other funding agencies, might be more enticed to commercialization of access. So eventually, everybody wants to reduce subsidies. So eventually, if we can tie access to some other form of development, tourism would be the most obvious because it's directly related. Then we could get the benefit of a larger capital outlay on an annual basis, and we have something to show for it going forward. So I believe the government should be persuaded to embark on a longer term development of augmenting access with tourism development, specifically for the long-term benefit of Montserrat. Next, please. How they could do this? We expect to get some ideas from the public, but some of them is in freight, cargo services. For instance, we've had ferries going back and forth. We've had aircraft go back and forth. Sometimes they go empty, and we do not use this in any way to export anything from the island. So, for instance, we have hotels in Antigua, and if you, I'm thinking, if you don't think of COVID situation at the moment, we have industries, near-term industries, right outside of Montserrat that we could support from Montserrat, but we do not have any engagement at all. So nothing ever leaves the island. We have empty ferries and empty airplanes sometimes that go out of Montserrat. And it's unfortunate that happens because we believe we can get into some kind of micro industry exporting these near abroad islands, for instance, near-term islands. Where practical, we should be able to do that. We also need to use access to develop our people. We spend a lot of money and we have nothing out of it. So human resources, we believe you can get training. If you want to expand in tourism, we believe some of the development can be done by developing people. So rotate people in and out of the areas of access so that they could get trained and develop skills in tourism to put it back into different parts of the island. We used to have a lot more training a long time ago, but we get nothing out of that now. So I think the government needs to get involved in training people, spending some of the money to train people, young people in particular, coming right out of school, and rotate them for the services and then deploy them in different micro businesses on the island. Next. Another form of expansion, or I would say in part of the development of the island, is additional gateways. We believe after so many years, we have had a ferry service for 25 years, and the only thing we've done with it is replicate air service, which has gone between Montserrat and Antigua. So if you think of how limiting that is. Also, after 50 years, we say, after 20 years of ferry do that, after 50 years, we still only fly to Antigua. We have an airport, we've had airports for 60 years in Montserrat or 50 something years in Montserrat, and we still only just fly to Antigua. So we need to go beyond Antigua. We need to start thinking about even areas like Guadeloupe, for instance, or St. Kitts, where there's larger populations. We need to somehow tie into those and try to get our businesses in Montserrat to support some of the industries on those islands. There's almost half a million people in Guadeloupe, for instance. And we do nothing with Guadeloupe. We can fly there pretty readily. We can use it as a gateway to Europe also. For instance, between Paris and Guadeloupe is a domestic flight. It's very, very inexpensive to get to Europe from Guadeloupe, but we can't get to Guadeloupe. But it's very, very expensive to go from Antigua, for instance. So that's a an area we can exploit is additional gateways. That's the quickest way or the most readily accessible way to bring tourists into Montserrat. When people come to these other islands and they want to come to Montserrat, they could spend part of the islands. We need that, but people fight against that, but we really need to expand the gateway beyond Antigua. It's too limiting. Next, please.
And Welsh, we're at the 5 minute mark, okay?
Okay. The recent ferry suspension, it's understandable because of travel restrictions now with COVID, but we believe it's an interim solution for the government and something that the UK has looked at as a, I would say, misallocation of capital over the many years because it's a very expensive resource that's not deployed beyond Antigua, for instance. So we believe the government will revisit that issue in the future. But the market demand for the ferry is still not justifiable at the moment. And that might take a while with the low population. So it might be difficult to return the ferry to service, but that's more than likely will be revisited again in the future. So that's if the ferry comes back into service, what do you do with the ferry beyond that? And again, with the aircraft or the airplanes at the airport, what do you do with them beyond Antigua? That needs to be thought about when the service comes back into being. Next. The quality of service, quickly. It's invaluable to the island, we know that. But again, I spoke about that, it's very mediocre. We can't really begin to think about access beyond Antigua until we upgrade the quality of service. Because when people come from Guadeloupe, when they come off an Air France flight in Guadeloupe, for instance, the quality of service you get in Guadeloupe is very different than the quality of service you get in Montserrat. So we believe that the basic standards have to be brought into being as part of the economic development. If you go to Antigua, you'll see a lot of training going on in Antigua, very much so. They develop their tourism sector by training their people very much, and they've made a lot of money from it. We should develop our people also. So that's part of the economic development is upgrading our quality in the form of access, upgrading the people's skills, whether we have to train them on island or send them over to get trained or bring people there to train them, that needs to get done. It's imperative that we do that. Next. Same thing here, is just a little more expansion of quality of service. But we believe it needs to be an integral part of access. If not, then we will never get beyond. Everybody understands what it is that we talk about. When you show up to the airport, when you show up to immigration, it's not only in the private area, it's also in the public areas, also in the government services, the immigration services, the custom services, both at the airport and in port. Those people need to be trained better to handle tourists and to handle local travel also. Next. Longer term planning, I will get beyond that. We believe the government needs to lay out a longer term plan, I would say in the 10-year time frame, 5-10-year time frame, so that the next government between now and 2030 will only have one change of government, so that put policies in place now so that the next form of government could take it and run with it and don't start from scratch and not start from scratch again. And that's what seemed to happen every time. So we believe that we should put things in place now. We'll recommend as part of a white paper to the government or what they potentially should do to be able to have a continuity up to 2030 to improve access. I think there's one more slide. The expectation is that the government will opt for policy that is mutually beneficial to both the purveyors of the services and the community alike. We think that's very, very important. Longer term planning, but at least present conditions. We cannot replicate the present conditions for the next 10 years. That's really, really important. We need funding that allows access to be part of the economic development. So every time you talk about the economic development, you have to talk about access. You have to talk about the benefits from access and what you get from that. And we need a transformative improvement in quality of service. It has to happen. if you get that, people will return to the island, principally even for the service they get. We need to develop our services. We need to develop our quality, both for local people and for the for tourists. Thank you.